Taiwan's leading chip company reveals the imminent roadblocks it's facing. Typhoon Koinu aftermath. We look at the leftover devastation of an outlying Taiwan island that found itself in the path of a mighty storm. The workshop arming foreign caregivers with the tools to tackle dementia. Plus,
I'm in a country that could be the first to go underwater because of climate change. Join me to find out how they're trying to create a backup nation.
A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Jaime Okan. Taiwanese chip giant TSMC is predicting challenges and competition amid global headwinds and opposition to new plants in Taiwan. Tiffany Wong reports.
A protest against one of the giants of Taiwanese technology. These residents of Taoyuan are demonstrating against an expansion to one of TSMC's chip-making plants. Activists now say that TSMC has abandoned plans to expand the factory, but the company has yet to confirm ahead of an expected briefing on Thursday. It comes at a time when the challenges facing the semiconductor giant are far from limited to Taiwan. Over the weekend, TSMC's founder, Morris Chang, warned of rising global headwinds in the industry and more competition for TSMC.
我们的竞争者会利用那种优势来要打败我们。
TSMC is the world's leading chip maker, a fact that has seen other countries courting its services. The company has invested billions of dollars to start producing its technology overseas, but that has also brought it some headaches. 2 new TSMC fabs in the U.S. state of Arizona were expected to start production next year, but have faced delays due to a talent shortage.
这样的变化与成长也不断地提醒我们，台积公司是一个全球性的企业，我们的根基在台湾。
TSMC's roots, though, remain in Taiwan, in science parks from the north to the south. In just this year alone, the chip's designer announced $2.8 billion in spending on a new production site in Hsinchu. These pair with plans to produce chips overseas beyond its 2 fabs in China, including factories in Japan, the US, and Germany. All that expansion hasn't slowed down the company's desire to innovate. Just earlier this year, the company announced it was ready to begin mass production of its advanced 3-nanometer chip, with 2 and 1 nanometer set to follow. But with an ever-growing list of stakeholders, from the U.S. to Taiwan, the recent protest is a reminder that not everyone welcomes an ever-growing TSMC. James Lin and Tiffany Wong for TaiwanPlus.
Meanwhile, the U.S. government is working to close loopholes that allow American chip companies to sell semiconductors to China. The U.S. announced sanctions on exports of American semiconductors to China last October. This comes as China is becoming highly dependent on semiconductor imports, spending more per year on chips than on oil. The U.S. restrictions are an attempt to prevent China from using American chips to strengthen their military. The new policies will still allow exports of chips for consumer products, but high-tech semiconductors the U.S. believes could pose a threat to national security will continue to be banned. Residents of Taiwan's Orchid Island are struggling to repair damage and get their lives back to normal, over a week after a devastating typhoon swept across the area. Rick Lauer has this story.
This is Orchid Island. We're about 60 kilometers off Taiwan's southeast coast. And it's been about 10 days since Typhoon Koinu ripped across the island. There was record-breaking wind speeds. The high winds caused lots of damage. They sunk boats in the harbors, they ripped down power cables, and they damaged homes and businesses. About $10 million worth of damage is estimated to have been done. Now power, water, internet and phone services have been restored, but there's still, as you can see, a lot of damage to be cleared up and a lot of things to be rebuilt. The fact that this island is far from the mainland and everything needs to be imported is slowing down that process. People here are becoming frustrated and a little bit feeling like they've been left behind. Rick Lauer and Annie Schreier on Orchid Island for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's hotels are seeing fewer customers, even as prices are rising. Average occupancy is less than half, while prices are up more than 20%. The Transport Minister Wang Guocai said he expects visitor numbers to return to pre-pandemic levels next year. But he also said Taiwan would not reopen to tourists from mainland China in 2023. Hotel groups say the end of pandemic travel restrictions and domestic subsidies means many Taiwanese would rather travel abroad than at home.
有补助的时候，大家都往郊区走嘛，大家该去的可能也都去了。现在没有补助了，然后又开放可以出国，所以大家现在都往国外跑。
There are hundreds of thousands of people suffering from dementia in Taiwan, and about 1 in 5 of them are being assisted by foreign caregivers. Most of these workers only receive basic training, which can make their jobs extremely challenging and stressful. Now, a workshop in Taipei is hoping to offer some solutions. Yu Jinghuang has more.
Untuk teman-teman semuanya yang bekerja di Taiwan, ingatlah kamu datang ke sini sebagai pahlawan keluarga. Semangat!
An emotional moment and words of encouragement from this Indonesian migrant caregiver. Sophie, who asks for her identity to be concealed, is attending a special workshop to help migrant workers in Taiwan overcome the difficulties involved in caring for people with dementia. Having looked after elderly people for more than a decade, Sophie says caring for those with dementia is one of the most challenging parts of her job.
晚上有时候不睡觉，也是会骂你，会凶。
It's estimated there are more than 300,000 people with dementia in Taiwan, and about 1/5 of them are being cared for by migrant workers from Southeast Asian countries. The number of foreign caregivers in the country is soon expected to rise, after the Labor Ministry lowered the criteria for people to hire caregivers from abroad. Those diagnosed with mild dementia are now allowed to file applications to hire foreign workers. But many only received minimum training prior to taking their jobs. And experts say workshops like this are necessary so workers can provide proper standards of care.
我觉得蛮重要，是应该要再照顾一段时间，要回来参加一些实体的这个交流或是一些工作坊。那这样子，我觉得可以让他们在这个照顾上有一些经验之后，再来针对经验做一些问题的探讨。那有专业的人员可以回答，那最好当然是用他们母语来做回答。
An investigation done by local NGO 140 says most Indonesian caregivers assisting dementia patients feel exhausted and stressed, mostly because of language barriers and a lack of knowledge of the illness. But here at the workshop, they are able to learn some basic medical skills and offload some of their worries.
可以交心的朋友，可以聊天，所以我们比较不会 stress。
我这么想办法照顾老人，如果开始生气，我就不会生气，因为有时候阿妈生气，我也在里面都是痛苦，想生气。
People with dementia can only be properly cared for when those looking after them are also healthy and in a good state of mind, whether they are family members or foreign caregivers. Although workshops like this offer support to migrant workers, they are not yet a common practice in Taiwan. So for many, there's no choice but to carry on alone. Joseph Wu and Yu Jinghuang for TaiwanPlus.
The owners of a factory that caught fire and exploded in September have promised to provide compensation and improve safety. The blaze in Taiwan's far south killed 10 people, including firefighters, and injured 113. In addition to offering compensation, owner Launch Technologies says it will bring in outside investigators and hire safety experts to prevent another disaster. But the factory has had a history of violating safety regulations, and at least one emergency management expert says it will be important for the factory to draw up a comprehensive plan.
我一直觉得他在这一次的整个应变过程里面，他可能会有计划上面的问题，他可能会有实际训练上面的问题。好的，在这样子的时候呢，我觉得他的方向都是好的，那重点是他有没有办法找到真正的专家来协助他了。
Coming up after the break, we've got a look at a landmark race.
The Taipei 101 run-up race is back after a 3-year hiatus, and runners here plan to race to the top of one of the world's tallest buildings.
For more news from Taiwan and around the world, go to TaiwanPlus.com and download the TaiwanPlus app.
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. Palestinian refugees are gathering at the southern border of Gaza in hopes that a crossing into Egypt will open. Reese Ayers has the latest.
Chaos on the streets of Gaza as Israeli strikes continue to pound the territory. Among the destruction, families left broken.
فيش حد يحمينا فيش حد يجري ورانا كيف احنا نعيش كيف جاوبونا
A conflict that's been brewing for decades is entering a deadly new phase, displacing millions of civilians, many of them children. Gaza is home to a disproportionate number of minors, with almost half of its over 2 million population under 18 years old. Hundreds of thousands are fleeing northern Gaza after the Israel Defense Forces issued an evacuation warning. The southern city of Khan Yunis is receiving over 1 million refugees, and with food, water and fuel becoming scarce, a humanitarian crisis is unfolding.
وضع مأساوي يعني أنا عندي في البيت 7 عائلات مشردة ومن الساعة 7 واقفة وهي هذا بكفي 7 عائلات.
Israel's strikes on Gaza come after Hamas killed over 1,400 Israelis in a surprise attack last week, taking over 100 civilians as hostages, many of whom are women, children and elderly. Hamas, a militant Islamist group that governs the Gaza Strip, seeks the eradication of Israel. Now, Israel has moved over 300,000 troops towards Gaza and is expected to begin a ground assault within days. Humanitarian organizations in the region are struggling to deal with the fallout from the attacks and the mass evacuation in Gaza.
As I speak with you, Gaza is running out of water and electricity. In fact, Gaza is being strangled, and it seems that the world right now has lost its humanity.
As hundreds of thousands of Palestinians pile into southern Gaza, US media reported that the Rafah crossing into Egypt would open to allow multinational Palestinians out and to let aid in. Both Hamas and the Israeli government deny any such agreement. With food and water supplies dwindling and an Israeli ground invasion imminent, the situation in Gaza shows few signs of easing. Howard Chung and Reese Ayers for TaiwanPlus.
China's foreign minister says Israel has gone too far in its response to attacks by Hamas. Speaking with his Saudi counterpart, Wang Yi said Israel's actions go beyond self-defense. According to Chinese state media, Beijing is trying to help resolve the conflict and to get humanitarian aid to Gaza. Wang also reportedly met with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. The two discussed the situation in Israel and Russia's ongoing invasion of Ukraine. Australian leaders are calling for unity in the wake of a resounding defeat for the nation's Indigenous Voice to Parliament referendum. Rosie Greninger reports.
A night of tears for those who wanted change.
But I am very, very disappointed, I'm very sad and I'm tired.
In a landmark referendum, Australia voting against a constitutionally enshrined voice to Parliament, which would have seen an independent body of Indigenous leaders advise Parliament on issues that affect them. The Voice is the first of a series of proposed reforms requested by Indigenous Australians in the 2017 Uluru Statement from the Heart, that they said would help with reconciliation with First Nations people. But it was overwhelmingly defeated, with just over 60% of people voting no and all of the country's 6 states receiving a majority of votes against the proposal. The Indigenous community was itself divided, with many saying the suggested changes weren't enough. The Australian Capital Territory, the only region with a majority yes tally. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, who backed the Yes campaign, disappointed but accepting of the nation's decision.
At the outset, I want to say that while tonight's result is not one that I had hoped for, I absolutely respect the decision of the Australian people.
First Nation supporters of the referendum have vowed to fall silent for 1 week and have asked for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flags to be lowered to half-mast to grieve the results. Many saying the defeat is a missed chance to address the many disadvantages of Indigenous people, facing shorter life expectancies, higher rates of incarceration, and a range of serious health issues.
I think that there will be a period of grief, and I think the whole nation should be grieving the lost opportunity here.
But they say their fight for reconciliation will continue.
I know this outcome will be hard for some, but achieving progress is never easy, and progress doesn't always move in a straight line. There are breakthroughs and heartbreaks.
Opposition leader Peter Dutton, who argued the voice would divide Australians along racial lines, says the result is a positive outcome for the country. He is being slammed by Yes campaigners, accused of spreading misinformation. But opinions about the outcome are divided.
I think it's an excellent result for the whole country. I think a yes would have been divisive, and you can't say yes to something you don't know what the outcome's going to be.
I'm sure the community is feeling a lot of sadness this morning, and I am too.
Both Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and the opposition leader are calling for the people of Australia to unite after a divisive campaign. The one thing all sides agree on, there needs to be change. But with the absence of a voice to Parliament, advocates for Indigenous rights hope it's more than just empty talk. Leon Lian and Rosie Greninger for TaiwanPlus.
The Pacific Island nation of Tuvalu is increasingly worried about how climate change could mean the end of their way of life. Louise Watt traveled to Taiwan's longest-standing ally in the Pacific to bring us this report.
This is an islet off the capital of Tuvalu, one of the smallest countries in the world. And if you've heard of Tuvalu, it's probably because of its climate change challenges. And demonstrating those, what I'm standing on right now is sand. But just 10 years ago, it used to be land. And on this land was this house. And the owners kept moving the house back and back. But in the end, they'd had to abandon it because it's no longer on land. The land is now behind it. And the people who live in homes behind this one, just a few meters away, they're worried about, well, what will happen in another 10 years' time? Will they lose their homes as well? And they say this should be a wake-up call to the rest of the world to get their act together, to stop temperatures rising, to stop sea levels rising, because they say they don't put out emissions like industrialized nations, and yet they say here in Tuvalu, they're seeing the biggest effects from climate change. Klein Wong and Louise Watt in Tuvalu for TaiwanPlus.
While the rest of the world pumps out carbon emissions, it's the tiny Pacific nation of Tuvalu that's bearing the brunt. As sea levels rise, it's facing a question of survival. So now it's trying to create a backup nation. Louise Watt reports from Tuvalu's capital.
28-year-old construction manager Angela Tuvalu is constantly worried about the health of her daughters. They live in Tuvalu, one of the lowest-lying countries on Earth. And the road in front of their home is regularly flooded with dirty water, a result of seawater bubbling up through the porous ground.
Sometimes it goes right up, and then it floods inside the church. Sometimes it reaches in the house, and also the preschool, the kindergarten, yeah.
And there's little she can do to stop it. In the years to come, Tuvalu and her family could lose not just their house and their neighbourhood, but their entire country. Tuvalu, with a population of less than 12,000, is one of the world's smallest nations, just 26 square kilometres across its 9 atolls, and waves are eroding its coast. This concrete base of a World War II anti-aircraft gun used to stand on land. Now it's about 20 metres from shore, showing how sea levels have already risen. Scientists estimate that the whole of Tuvalu could be submerged by the end of the century. And so the government is trying to address that by creating a digital copy of the country, meaning it would be the first nation to exist in the metaverse. Tuvalu has already used land survey data and drone footage to create a virtual copy of its smallest island. And despite difficulties with internet connectivity, it now wants to bring it to digital life.
We're looking at not just recording, digitizing our culture and our history, but presenting it in a way that is attractive and it's appealing to people. And this is where we want to use platforms like the metaverse, for example, to be able to recreate both a virtual copy of the physical territory, but also uploading artifacts, people in that space telling stories and even teaching the language.
Kofe says it's the responsibility of the government to prepare for a worst-case scenario. And by migrating into cyberspace, Tuvalu will still be able to offer its people a shared existence, even if they have to abandon their territory. But the government is also reclaiming land, and some here believe that should be the focus rather than a digital future.
We have to physically do something more concrete to maintain Tuvalu on the map in a way of looking at developments of raising up Tuvalu instead of fully relying on digital wall.
Worried about climate change, many Tuvaluans are already emigrating, which, for mother of 3 Tuvalu, underscores the need for a backup digital nation.
If everyone moves out of this island, if it's gone, at least we have our culture and identities to carry with us. So when we go, we not only just go and live in strange islands or strange countries, but at least we have an area of our own that looks exactly like home, and we practice everything that we have learned here and we take it with us.
It's Tuvalu's National Day, and people are recording what they can of the festivities. A heritage passed down through songs and dance, now being preserved in digital memory. So Tuvaluans can hold on to their shared identity as they strive to exist against the rising seas. Klein Wong and Louise Watt for TaiwanPlus.
And stay tuned to TaiwanPlus this week. Louise Watt will be bringing us more exclusive stories from Tuvalu. The Taipei 101 run-up race is back after a 3-year hiatus. Our reporter Bryn Thomas was there to see what's up and to talk to athletes about their high hopes for the event.
And they're off. And with that, Taiwan's most famous running event is back on track. Taipei 101, Taiwan's tallest skyscraper, is marking its first run-up race since the COVID-19 pandemic, and athletes here are happy to be hitting the stairs again.
就平常也会去健身房重训，然后也有跑步、爬山这样，是跟同事一起来报名参加。本来以为就是没有机会报到，然后就顺利报到了，很开心。
This year's event was smaller than previous ones. Fewer people were allowed to join, and organizers did not send targeted invitations to star runners from abroad. But that did not stop them from sprinting to sign up. The 3,500 spots were booked in less than 20 minutes, and several famous runners flew in to compete. Completing the race means scaling 91 floors, or 2,046 individual steps. And with a total distance of just 390 meters, it may not seem like much on paper, but for many, it's a tall order. These runners are getting ready to run to the top of one of the tallest buildings on Earth. And while their runs will be timed, most are just here for a challenge. But a few have eyes on the top spot, and if they break a record, they could win up to $6,000. Top stair runners like Australian Mark Bourne, Japan's Ryoji Watanabe, and Hiroshi Kato and Malaysian Saul Wai Ching were among those lining up. And while each of them finished with standout times, it took a lot out of them.
很挑战，它的楼梯的台阶很高，所以比我们一般比赛的高很多，所以比较挑战。
And what drives these people to push themselves so hard?
もうとってもきついです。きついけれども、そのきつさがすごいこの競技の魅力なんで、今最高です。どうかなわかんない。今までの自分の過去の自分には勝ったと思うんで、それがすごく嬉しいです。
Ryoji Watanabe ended up placing second. The top spot went to Saul Wai Ching. He rocketed to the top in just a hair over 11 minutes and 40 seconds. But he's not one to rest on his laurels. He's got his eyes on the upcoming Tower Running World Championships at Taipei 101 next May.
Next year will be the World Championship, so I have to come here this year just to get used to the stairs, because the stairs here is way tougher than any other buildings around the world.
While some athletes are already eyeing bigger targets, most of today's runners are just happy to make it to the top and to see Taipei's most famous race back in stride. Alex Chen, Sandy Chi, and Bryn Thomas for TaiwanPlus.
Thank you for watching TaiwanPlus News. Remember to download the TaiwanPlus app for more stories from Taiwan and around the world. Finally, we leave with the images of Latin Americans watching the annular solar eclipse. I'm Hamioka, and take care and see you next time.